So today, OpenAI introduced Canvas, a new way of working with ChatGPT to write and code. Now, at first glance, you might think this is similar to Anthropic's artifacts, and the idea is very similar. But in some ways, I feel like it's better.
Each AI assistant is like another set of arms. Subscribe and expand your reach.
The big idea here is, number one, you don't have to start with a blank slate. For example, if you're writing a story, you can have ChatGPT provide you with some starting ideas, brainstorm some locations, characters, etc. Write an introduction for you, and then if you wanted to make any tweaks, if you wanted to add some emojis, if you wanted to clarify some things, it'll go ahead and do that. Now, you could kind of do this before with ChatGPT, but it would just kind of rewrite the whole thing from scratch. Here, you can actually revise it in real time. And it feels almost like working with a coworker or an assistant that kind of takes your ideas and then in real time adjusts the actual thing that you're working on. Where I think this gets really interesting is coding specifically. So first of all, to access this, you got to change the model to GPT 4.0 with Canvas, still in beta mode. And by default, looks very similar to kind of how your normal ChatGPT looks. There's nowhere on the screen I can put myself where I'm not blocking something. How about this? No, that's too weird. I'll just do this. All right, how about this? We're going to ask ChatGPT, the 4.0 model with Canvas, to make us a little HTML game. It will be one of those resource management games. We're going to start with the basics of food, wood, and ore. We're going to have 10 villagers. You can assign the villagers to collect the various resources. Let's start there. Let's see what it gives us. All right, so we're going to go click play. And what you'll notice is very quickly it brings up the canvas, or in Anthropic's Claude, right? They refer to it as the artifacts. Whatever you call it, expect to see this more and more in the various AI tools you interact with, because this really improves the functionality. So as you can see here on the right, we have this code. We can change things, right? So we can go here where it says resource management game and improve the title. Cool resource management game. Much better. So currently you can't run the code right within this window, but I feel like that would be pretty simple and probably coming very soon. Think something like Google Colab where you can just run all the code and test everything within the browser. That's the important thing I think to understand here, that this is like a very kind of evolving process and evolving software, evolving tools that started out as just a chatbot that you just went back and forth with that wrote things for you and you could take those things and go and use it. But here, they use this idea of a canvas where both of you guys are working on this canvas together. But let's see what it did here really fast. We're going to click copy. I'm just going to use a notepad here to make it easier. I'll just paste the code in here. I'll call it game.html and Control S to save it. Here it is on my desktop. Let's click on it. Boom. And we have our very own resource management game. I actually deleted the part where it said cool resource management game because I wanted to see, first of all, the default. I'm going to change it to cool resource management game. And let's see if we can use that. So this is into our notepad, Control S, and let's refresh this. Cool resource management game. All right, so we have 10 villagers, 10 available villagers. And let's assign 1 to food, and we can see the food marker going up, 1 to wood, and we can see the wood sort of resource going up, and 1 to ore. Very, very cool. And I'll look at that. If I try to assign villagers when we have no more available, it says no available villagers to assign. So I feel like it did everything perfectly. It did everything very well. The UI is kind of cool to begin with, which is nice. But obviously, this is super, super simple. Most coding AI tools should be able to do this, but here's where it gets interesting. Let's go back to our canvas, and we'll start by adding some functionalities. So for example, we probably need places to store all those resources. So we're going to add limits to how many resources you can have at any given time. And in order to expand that capacity, we're going to have to build some buildings to make that happen. Let's add a limit to how much resources you can have at any given moment. Create the ability to buy buildings. Each building expands the capacity to store resources. Let's call the food storage building, granary? We're going to call it granary. For wood, we're going to call it shed. What do you store ore in? You have the quarry, but that's not where you store it. That's where you get it. Is that right? You know what? I'm just going to have it figured out. Come up with a name for the ore storage place. It's ChatGPT. It will figure it out. Make it so you can buy those buildings with its own resource. So food buys granary, etc. All right, now notice when I hit enter, what's going to happen with our code here. It's going to start at the top and go through it line by line. Now, most lines will not be changed, as you can see, but every once in a while it updates it. It changes as needed. And as you can see, it's actually expanding how many lines we have total since we're adding new capabilities, new buildings, new sort of functionality, etc. So let's pop this into our game HTML, Control S to save, and we're going to go ahead and click refresh. So one thing I'm noticing right off the bat is it dropped our suggestion for the name change. So it's not the cool resource management game anymore. So it seems like maybe by default, it deletes any changes, any modifications that you make to it, which fine. All right, so we got some resources, and notice now it's showing 0 out of 100. So we're gonna add 3 to each and see where that takes us. Maybe a little bit extra for food. As you can see here, we have buildings. So we can buy buildings for 50 of whatever resource they're going to expand. So granary, 50 food. Notice I'm going to click here and we lose 50 of that resource and we expand our capacity by 150. Perfecto. In one of my earlier videos, when the AI did something right, I was like, that's a bingo. And some people in the comments told me that that's not how you say it, that it is in fact okay to just say bingo. But surprisingly, a lot of people picked up on the reference that was from Quentin Tarantino's excellent movie, Inglourious Bastards. If you've never seen it, at least check out the opening scene. YouTube has it, the full opening scene. Apparently, the whole movie was almost scrapped because they couldn't find the perfect actor to play one character, this character in particular, and then they found the actor. The whole thing is a masterpiece. Anyways, where were we? Yes. So we're going to buy a shed, a foundry. Very good, ChatGPT. That's a bingo. Now, this is probably a good time to take a look at this thing here. So kind of in the bottom right of your screen, you have this little sliding table that gives you a few more options. It doesn't pop up until the canvas itself comes up. So you are going to have a different sort of the sliding table, this functionality for coding versus writing. So for coding, we get code review, port to a language, fix bugs, add logs, and add comments. So reviewing code, ChatGPT provides inline suggestions to improve your code. And this is extremely well done. So if I click review code, code review, it goes through again line by line. Actually here it doesn't quite show it, but as you can see here, it's thinking on which comments it needs to make. And then similar to kind of how you have in Google Drive, for example, people can comment off to the side to provide their suggestions. This is going to provide us with something similar. It's not going to automatically change the code, but it'll kind of say, here's one thing you should think about. In one of the other sort of these little games or software things that I was trying to build with it, there was a global kind of tick rate, the speed at which the game was running. So it suggested to not make it global, to create sort of separate values for different portions of the game. It wasn't a big deal, but it was interesting because if I were to keep expanding the game and adding more functionalities and different levels and different sort of portions of the game, certainly taking, the time to do something like that could save you tons of headaches down the road. It would kind of like preemptively build something in a way that was a little bit more scalable. Not that long ago, people developing this code would have to, number one, kind of be aware of this, realize that something like this could be useful. Then they had to go in and actually implement that functionality. It's not a big deal, but it takes a certain cognitive load, takes a little bit of time. Here, it's done automatically. And all you have to do is decide, do you want to implement that or not? So here gives some suggestions to improve coding quality. So if we look at the canvas, when we scroll down, we will see examples of those notes. For example, here you can see these little speech bubbles. If we click on them, ChatGPT comes up and says, this function, this highlighted function here, this function could be optimized by using a loop to iterate through the resources instead of repeating similar blocks of code for each resource. Now here, of course, it's sort of commenting and improving on its own code. So it's going to be interesting to see if it's actually able to meaningfully improve it if you just keep asking it to add suggestions. But really where I think most people use it is when they paste in their own code and then ask for suggestions. This is where that would really shine. Now, we did a video a few weeks ago at this point, I think, whenever the new O1 model was released. And this is Dr. Kyle Cabasares. So he was the one that decided to ask the new, OpenAI model O1 to see if it could rewrite the code that he used to do his dissertation, to do his PhD dissertation. And it did. It wrote the code that it took him something like a year of his life that he worked on to write. It just went ahead and did it. What's funny that when he was looking at it, it seemed like it did it in a lot less lines, kind of like more elegant. And when he fed his own code to it and asked for suggestions, it was able to give him a lot of suggestions on how to make that code, better, more streamlined. So it looks like here he is. He actually was able to meet up with Sam Altman at the Dev Day, OpenAI Dev Day 2024. You got to have mixed feelings about AI being able to do stuff that took you a year to do. I've been encountering that more and more as well. In the last decade plus of the work that I used to do, so much of the time that I invested learning how to do something and then actually doing it, that's kind of like obsolete because AI can do it better. Either it can automate it completely or it enables you to do it so much faster, like with graphics generation and stuff like that. If you wanted to create some images and stuff like that, it's so much easier now. And I'm not sure if people are in general like happy about that or like upset. Do you feel like it's wasted time, or do you feel like, oh, I'm going to get even better now? I've had mixed feelings. I've had my feelings go both ways, and I'm sure Dr. Kyle did too. But the point is, it's able to give you suggestions on how to improve your code, and just by hitting apply, it goes through and is going to rewrite this portion of it. It's going to go again line by line, but it's probably not going to change too many things other than the one line that it was talking about, or the few lines that deal with it. So let's take a look here. So yeah, it's rewriting this lines of building. And then it also has some other suggestions. Consider adding a mechanism to pause or stop the interval when certain conditions are met. We might do those later, but for now, let's see how it's working. We'll put that into our game HTML, Control S. And I think everything should be pretty much the same. Another feature here is to add comments. So if you're looking at some code that maybe somebody else wrote, or perhaps you wrote like a while ago and you didn't bother to comment, too well, it can go through. And as you can see here, it's adding quite a bit of comments so that it's a lot easier to know what certain portions of the code are doing. Because sometimes you can get a really good piece of code that works that's kind of useless if you want to change anything because you have no idea what it does, because the person that created it didn't bother to write out in basic English what each portion of it does. So having the AI, the ChatGPT, go through and this checks if enough ore is available to buy a foundry. And then this update the UI to reflect the changes. It just makes it very, very simple. Now, this is simple code, but you can imagine how important this is as it scales up, as it gets more complex. The other function, add logs, inserts print statements to help you debug and understand your code. That is very, very cool. So add comments, we've seen that done. Fix bugs, detects and rewrites problematic code to resolve errors. And port to a language, translates your code into JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, Java, C++, or PHP. So we can just take whatever we've written and just ask it to translate it into a different coding language, which is pretty cool. So we're going to test some of this stuff out later. But again, as you can see, a lot of this is probably a lot more useful if you're not having the things, code everything from scratch, if you're bringing your own code. But let's continue and see if we can improve our resource management game. We're going to add the following elements to the game. Let's make this kind of complex, right? So one, add a, how do I put this? Breeding mechanic to create more villagers. Have a place where you can add villagers to, where they produce more villagers. Every 2 villagers added creates a new villager every 30 seconds. I think that's fine. I'm pretty sure that's how that works, right? So 2. Next, we're going to create a quest that our villagers can embark on. So each one will randomly unlock a new building, and adding a villager will take them on a quest for a random amount of time between 30 seconds and 90 seconds. And actually, this will be function number 3. Before that, let's add function number 2, which is the new buildings that we can unlock. All right, so we're going to add the ability to unlock new buildings. Each of the 3 resource holding buildings will have a tier 2 and a tier 3 buildings to unlock. Also add unlockable buildings that generate resources without the need for villagers. For example, a mine can generate ore, etc. So we might have to spell this out a little bit more clearly for it, but let's just see where it goes with this. So I'm going to click go. And so again, it starts from the beginning and starts going through the code. And so in the perfect world, what they're going to do is they're going to have a new functionality where we can send our villagers out on quests after a random amount of time. That's 30 seconds to 90 seconds. They will come back and unlock a new building for us that we can start building. For example, to generate new resources or to improve our ability to store those resources. Interestingly, I think because we did that thing where we asked it to comment the code really well, it's commenting every single new line that it's adding. It looks like very, very, very well, very thoroughly. But that makes the thing, a lot longer. It takes a lot longer to go through it. So keep that in mind. If you want great comments, it's going to take a while to redo every single new thing. Looking back at it, I probably would not have asked for it. All right, so that's done. Very cool. So let's go ahead and copy that. Game HTML, Control S to save. And let's refresh. And here we can see all of our new buildings. Now, right off the bat, I'm looking at it and it looks like we can just buy them right at the top without unlocking them. So let's see if that's the case. For example, shed tier 2, if I click on it, yep, we're able to buy it. So it did not do that as intended. Also, I'm realizing that we need to be able to unassign villagers. All right, so let's do this. Let's go back to make sure the new buildings are locked until they are discovered by the quest. Only the first 3 resource buildings should be available when the game starts. Let's do that. All right, so that took probably just under a minute. So let's see. All right, so we're going to click refresh. And okay, that's looking a lot better. All right, so we're going to send 1 person on quest, assign 2 to breed, and assign 1 to each resource. We have 2 left. Actually, let's assign 4 to breed. Okay, so actually when I click assign villagers to breed, it does it in breeding pairs. So 3 pairs, meaning so 6 people that we've sent on that one. So for some reason, the breeding pairs are consumed when they produce a new villager. So while we have more total villagers, the breeding pairs are now gone. So I think ChatGPT here assumed that our villagers breed in a way similar to black widow spiders, where the female just consumes the male after mating, and then the children consume the mother upon their birth, which is not what I had in mind. I'm going to be honest with you. That's not a bingo. The good news is our quest is completed and we have unlocked Shed 3. So what we expect to happen now is that the Shed 3 will appear here in the buy buildings. And there it is, buy Shed tier 3. Obviously, how I was thinking about it is first you unlock tier 2, then tier 3, but that's my fault. I did not describe that correctly. All right, so far, I think everything's been going pretty well. The things that aren't quite what I wanted it to be are in general because I didn't explain it well enough, and it's pretty easy to get those things corrected. Its design choice for the breeding mechanic is, I gotta say, a little bit unsettling. But again, I could have described it better. So right now we're gonna do something where we're gonna try to fix all of the issues all at once. We're gonna say fix the following. The breeding pairs should remain after the child is born. Assume these are humans. I'll just leave it at that. 2, create a way for us to unassign villagers from their tasks. And tier 3 of a building should only be unlocked after the tier 2 building is unlocked. All right, if it does this, I gotta say that would be pretty impressive. Like if it nails all 3 of those things in sort of one shot, that would be pretty cool. All right, so it's going through, it's changing some things, it's not changing the others. By the way, this is where one of the ways in which it is better than Anthropic's Claude is it shows you kind of as it goes through what it is changing, what it's not changing. I think that's going to be very useful for a number of reasons. Number 1, you're able to cycle through versions. So there's a sort of a version control, which is going to be very important for kind of like the more advanced software development tasks. You're able to go back to a certain checkpoint, maybe where you took the wrong turn or whatever. You can kind of go back there and restart there to get back a certain functionality or whatever. All right, so now it's completed. That was pretty fast. So let's see. I'm going to save it and refresh. All right, so we have assigned to food, assign to or, and unassign. Let's add 1 of the breeding pairs here. We're going to send 1 villager on a quest. And if I unassign, they go back to being available villagers. That is excellent. One thing that would be nice to add is to actually show how many villagers are on a different resource, but let's max out our wood. And looks like our breeding is a lot more human-like now. So as you can see here, the sort of breeding pair remains there, but we get an extra villager. So perfect. It's a whole lot less weird now. All right, so we got the granary tier 3. So again, it's unlocking tier 3 before tier 2. So I said tier 3 buildings can only be unlocked after their respective tier 2 buildings are unlocked. So this is actually its summary to me about what it did. So that's not working. It's not working as intended because look, here it has the tier 3 But other than that, it did everything very, very well. Except now that I'm thinking about it, it looks like the breeding pair no longer produces more villagers. So it produces one and then just stops. Oh, this is interesting. So when I try to buy tier 3, it says, well, you got to unlock tier 2 first. Okay, so that's good. So it did something. And it looks like now the quest got us granary tier 2. So we're able to buy that. So I'm going to say the breeding pairs should keep producing villagers, not stop after one. And we're going to throw it a little bit of a wild card. Think up of another cool mechanic to add to the game and then add it. Let's see what it comes up with. All right, so it fixed the breeding pairs and added a trading post that allows trading resources for others. That's not a bad idea. All right, so I've added all of my villagers to the breeding mechanic. So what I expect to see is available villagers to start going up continuously as long as we have those breeding pairs in there. And we have the trading post where we can exchange one resource for another. That's pretty cool. All right, so as you can see here, we have 5 more available villagers, and ideally now we're gonna see more every single time that process runs. And it does. It's working as intended. Everything is doing perfectly. And to quickly test the trading post, we're gonna trade 50 food for 25 wood. And that is working as intended. We also unlocked the lumber mill. So as you can see here, we took a fairly simple game, a simple concept, had it created, then kept adding stuff to it. And all in all, it did very, very well. Keep in mind that not that long ago, something like this would have been throwing up a lot of errors, a lot of bugs. As you try to add more things, it would keep screwing up other parts of the game. And I'm not talking about ChatGPT in particular, I'm talking about pretty much every other tool that we've tested. This was the case not that long ago, right? And so very recently with the addition of Claude was the first thing that really significantly stepped up the coding abilities, as well as, being able to use artifacts, which made it a lot easier. And now we have, the 4.0 model doing this with the canvas ability. I mean, it's getting a lot better. It's getting a lot easier to use. Imagine the process of, let's say you're a kid trying to learn how to code. How did that look 10 years ago, 20 years ago, versus imagine doing something like this, where you're able to, in English, tell what you want. You're able to ask questions. I mean, literally, I can, for example, I know this is all like commented out, or rather it has comments telling you exactly what to do. But if it didn't, I could select this and say, ask ChatGPT to explain it. I'm going to say, explain this. And it knows what I'm talking about. It knows this piece of code. And it goes line by line, and it's talking about what that thing does. So it says the selected code implements a trading function that allows players to exchange resource in game. And then look at that. It goes line by line and explains every single piece and what it does. It even explains the gameplay mechanic that you're exchanging it at a bit of a loss, right? So the cost ratio is not 1-to-1. Now, if you've been doing software development for 10, 20 years, a lot of this maybe doesn't seem like a big deal right now, but to a lot of people that for kids trying to learn, for people that are new, that are trying to get into it, this completely changes the playing field. You no longer need to, go on YouTube and watch tutorials or ask your smart coding friend to help you or take a class. You can open up ChatGPT and start building whatever you want. And it will sit there and very patiently explain to you what everything does, how it works. It will comment things for you so you know what it's doing. It will create these logs, which are things like this, where it's going to create a pop-up where it's like, that's not enough, or to buy a mine. So it'll give you error messages. Right now, if I remember my stats correctly, I think some fraction of 1% of the world can code. As something like this becomes more commonplace, I think that number is going to change pretty rapidly. And now really fast, let's take a look at the other side of this, the other side of the coin, the writing canvas. Again, it's pretty much the same thing, and it doesn't open up until you start interacting with it. So right now I'm going to say, let's write an article for a tech blog. Start by researching the news about the mushroom-controlled robots. Have you heard about that? It's weird. Write out the 5 to 10 most interesting pieces of info you find about that. So I'm going to click go. And what I assume will happen is they will pull up the canvas. So notice it searched 5 sites: Independent, Science Daily, Verdict, and Cornell University. And based on those things, it gave us kind of the 5 most interesting pieces of information that it found from there. Notice it's also citing the sources from which it's getting this information. So it's not making it up. It's he's like, here, you don't trust me? Boom, Cornell. All right, so then we're going to say, based on this, create an article that covers this topic, shoot for around 750 words. All right, so now as you can see, it's slid over into the canvas mode. And you can see this canvas mode is a little bit different from the coding one. It's just text. And this works like a notepad. You can write in it, right? You can add words like the cool collaboration between biology. See how much I improved that article? And here it is. Here is the thing. So yes, you saw that right. It just researched and created its very own article. Do you hate when people do that? When they say something, they're like, yes, you heard that right. And then they like repeat it. Sometimes I think that's too much. All right, so here it's saying, yes, you read that right. Let's tell it, get rid of things like, yes, you read that right. And we're going to tighten up the writing a bit. So it's going to go through it similar to how it did the code. So notice it's going through kind of line by line. A lot of it is staying as is. So you can see that sort of line going through it. It's tightening up a little bit here and there, but a lot of it is remaining the same. So it's not fundamentally kind of rewriting the article. It's going through and just changing what it needs to change. All right, now we're going to add 3 mushroom jokes where appropriate. Something to break up the article and add a bit of humor. Boom. So it says it's failed to edit, keeps failing to edit it. Do you think it's because the jokes are so bad that it's just like I can't do this? I was not created for this. Okay, here we go. So that took, it had some issues doing it, but it figured it out. So it kind of wrote out the jokes that it did, the mushroom jokes. So hold on to your hats, folks. And just to think, these mushrooms really know how to grow on you. It's like giving a mushroom legs and letting it decide where to go. Talk about fungi taking control. I just realized it's going to do a fungi joke. It's got to be number 3. You could say these mushrooms are fungi to be with, handling more than just one job at a time. All right, I guess I asked for it. But as you can see, it's a very easy process to kind of go back and forth and now improve and add whatever elements you want to this article. We're going to say, let's mention NVIDIA's robotics somewhere. Try to link it to something relevant in this article. So we're going to click that. And so here it's adding, NVIDIA's advancements in AI-driven robotics, right? So it's linking this to this idea of, the mycelium gathering data and NVIDIA's adding the processing capabilities. So what this means is that OpenAI is building something that, for example, Andrej Karpathy has been mentioning for quite a while. What is AI? What is ChatGPT? What should we think of it as? Like, what form is it going to take? Is it a chatbot? Is that all it ever will be? Now, eventually, we're going to have agents, these things that kind of go and do things on your behalf. But another sort of application or a way of looking at it, a way of interacting with it, is as an operating system. You can probably see how something like this can replace whatever coding tools you use. And in fact, the new sort of generation of kids growing up learning how to code will likely use something like that from the very beginning. They're probably not going to open up whatever coding tools you used to use 10 years ago, and start with a blank page and start writing stuff out. Their first interaction when they're writing a new piece of software will be with something like ChatGPT. They're going to say, here's what I'm trying to do. Start by giving me a kind of a rough outline of all the stuff that needs to happen, pull in all the libraries I'm going to need, whatever. Back in the olden days, if you took a class on how to do HTML, for example, you would type this, on your keyboard, you would type this. And then, later you had tools that would kind of try to figure out what you're trying, kind of auto-suggest things to make it faster. Then you kind of hit tab once it knew what you were trying to say to fill in the rest of it. You had things like GitHub that you can just pull certain pre-existing things and start there. But something like this feels like the next iteration of that. The first step to building any piece of software is you just type it into a ChatGPT-like interface, and it kind of gets you started. You're not starting with a blank page. Now, obviously, for more advanced people that have certain very specific criteria, they're building something that's not common. It's unique. There's not a lot of code on the internet about that thing, right? Of course, then you're still going to need kind of a more old school approach. Probably, although I'd be interested to see, as these models improve, is maybe you'll get to the point where even at those levels, you're going to be relying on it more and more. I mean, notice this is the 4.0 model. How much better is it going to be when we're using, for example, the 0.1 model to do some of this stuff? And so more and more AI is getting kind of between us and what we used to think of as the operating system. So you're talking to ChatGPT to do your coding. You're talking to ChatGPT to do your writing, to do your research. Notice how it went online and pulled the data that you need from online. It highlighted the important parts and then it wrote the article. I'm no longer really interacting with something like Word or Bing or any of that stuff. There's an AI in between me and those things. AI is kind of like the operating system. Google's Notebook LM is kind of the same thing. You add whatever resources you wanted to it and then produces a podcast for you or a summary for you. So more and more, I think things are going to be moving in this direction where instead of like you clicking on stuff and interacting with different apps and whatever, you have your very own AI assistant that knows kind of what you want, that's customized to you, that's doing a lot of this stuff. And we're seeing that kind of evolve in front of our eyes. Maybe it's not perfect yet. It's not ready for prime time yet. But eventually, I mean, you can imagine this code, you're just being able to run it within this window. So you're talking to your chatbot, you're creating the code, you're iterating on it, you're adding new functionality, you're testing it right then and there. By the way, at that point, if it's running within this window, you probably no longer need to be troubleshooting it because that data gets passed back to ChatGPT. You can probably run in the background to make sure that it's working as intended, right? When you're running that game and something breaks, I mean, ChatGPT, like with vision, can probably even start like testing the game to make sure that all the buttons work, that it's all working as intended. Kind of completes that loop almost of what a software developer would be doing, right? Not only is it writing the code, adding it, but it's like testing the actual game, the output in the browser. We might not be that far away from something like that. So if you want to see kind of like the next step in AI and kind of the functionality and how we're going to be using it as an operating system, I would say check out ChatGPT with Canvas. I would check out Notebook LM, Anthropic's, Claude with artifacts, because we're going to be seeing that more and more. That's what the internet's going to look like. That's what the computers are going to look like. And all the things that we interact with will kind of be fed into that. Think about email. Why would you open up Gmail or whatever email thing you use and go like look through your emails when you can ask an agent like, hey, what are the important emails? Did this person get back to me? They said, yeah, they're seeing if you can meet them on Thursday. You say, yeah, set up for Thursday, put in my calendar. You're no longer clicking on that email, typing out your response, clicking send, and then clicking over to your calendar and then clicking on the date and then clicking add event and then typing in the event. That's barbaric. I feel like very quickly it's going to become weird that we used to do that. Like, why did we have to poke our fingers on so many different things just to do that, right? With an agent, it's like it kind of knows you. Okay, your mom said she wants to meet you Thursday at 2. I know your life better than you do, so I know that you're available Thursday at 2. And I know this is something that's important to you, so say yes, and I'll set it up, and then I'll remind you when the time comes for it. You say yes, it replies, it sets it up, it reminds you, Thursday morning. We are very close to that. And this is taking shape of what that is going to look like, I think. Really, I think the only pieces that we're still missing, number one, I want to have that advanced voice mode combined with this. We don't really have that yet. Advanced voice mode is just available on the phones. I'd love to be able to use that and talk to it and have it be able to do this. That's going to make it a lot simpler. That's number one. Number two, we wanted to have vision and kind of a little bit more of an agentic capabilities, or at least to where it's controlling your computer, right? Because once it gives you the code, what's preventing it from posting it in here, saving it to your desktop, and then opening that to run it and make sure that everything works? Now, Sam Altman talked about this on Dev Day 2024. So they were saying, like, at what point are we going to have these agents operating your computer? And he was saying, obviously there's some risk there. Obviously, you don't want something that hallucinates and screws up to be operating computers, something that it could like mess up. Because you could, make some mistakes. Somebody says, hey, wire me some money. You don't want your agent to be like, sure, let's do it. It could do some real damage if it's smart enough to use the computer, but not smart enough to make the right decisions, obviously. But if you're running code, for example, in something like Google Colab, where it's in the cloud, in the browser, there's less risk there. So certainly it seems like it should be able to do a lot more of the troubleshooting and all that stuff for you. If you have a WordPress blog, it'll probably be able to post to your WordPress blog. There's not that much damage you can do that a backup won't solve. So we're probably going to be seeing these agents unleashed in sort of these controlled smaller environments with things that maybe either they can't break, or even if they do break it, it's easy to kind of restore it back. And so with something like advanced voice mode, a little bit more agentic capabilities, the ability for it to control your computer, vision, to be able to see and understand what it sees on screen. I mean, we're getting very close to the time when we no longer will have to click on things or type stuff in. Or if we're doing that, if we're typing stuff in, it's just to communicate to that AI. And the rest is handled kind of behind the scenes for us. We've already seen companies, examples of that, and they work pretty well. They're pretty good, but they're still, kind of prototype versions. But man, we're getting much closer. And the O1 model is showing that, yes, indeed, it can reason and think through things and have a bit of, maybe like long-term planning. And now with these sort of back and forth interfaces, we're figuring out like what the best user interface is to talk to these models. Certainly just the chat back and forth is limited. So now having this sort of like canvas that appears where we can both kind of paint on it or interact with it in some way. Once more people start interacting with it and it's proven to be kind of the way to go, then companies like OpenAI and Google and Anthropic, they'll adopt it and they'll keep iterating on it and improving it. But yeah, it just seems like this is going to be the new operating system that like all the kids growing up now, that's how they're going to be taught to interact with a computer. That's how they're going to code. That's how they're going to write. You can probably write cursive, right? You probably kind of remember how to write cursive. Maybe you forgot. Maybe it'll take some practice. But at some point you could, right? But think about the younger generation, 2-3 younger generations before you or after you, I guess the people younger than you. How many of them can write cursive? I think with like the Zoomers, I think it's probably like less than 1%, I would assume. Anyways, I'm starting to feel like I'm an old man rambling about the past and the future. So I guess I'll just say that my name is Wes Roth. Thank you for watching, and get off my lawn.